Hello, I'm Dr. William Schlosser, Washington State University, School of the Environment. This is my classroom.
An ecological community is a group of actually or potentially interacting species living in the same location. Communities are bound together by a shared environment and a network of influence each species has on each other. Inherent in this view is the notion that whatever affects one species will also affect many others, oftentimes called the balance of nature. We build an understanding of communities by examining the way interactions involving pairs of species or collections of mini-species. Species interactions within ecological webs include four main types of two-way interactions: mutualism, commensalism, competition, and predation, which includes herbivory and parasitism. Because of the many linkages among species within a food web, changes to one species can have far-reaching effects. We will next examine competition and predation, and then return to the consideration of more complicated indirect and cascading effects. Community ecology is the study and theory of how populations of organisms interact with each other and react to the non-living surroundings. As a subset of the general study of ecology, this field of specialization explores the organization and functioning of biological communities. An integral process in these events is movement. Motivations with causes and consequences of movement are major evolutionary forces that are affected by social systems, growth forms, seasonality, habitat, and many ecological and behavioral parameters. Movement has consequences for individuals as well as for populations and communities, and its effects on inclusive fitness are ultimately the selecting forces for dispersal, migration, exploration that affects distribution, abundance, and dispersion of individuals. A biotic community, also known as a biota or biosymbiosis, is a group of organisms that live together and interact with each other within an environment or habitat. Together, the biotic community and the physical landscape or abiotic factors define ecosystems. But consider that we are one step below the ecosystem as we investigate the community. The biosymbiosis is an association of different organisms forming a closely integrated community. Biotic communities vary in size, and larger ones may contain smaller ones. Species interactions are evident in food or feeding relationships. The characteristics of a community reflect the physical environment which it occupies because the species are best adapted to the existing environmental conditions. A biotic community is a group of interdependent organisms inhabiting the same region and interacting with each other. Look to this scene to see plant community variability from forest moving up the hillside above the grasslands below. These are the primary producing plants of this landscape, but the primary consumers, those ungulates, form an interacting community where interactions abound. There is mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, and more. These are the interactions of this community. In order to consistently define and describe these interactions, we define a community's structure as described by its species richness, which is the number of species present, the species diversity, which is the measure of both species richness and species evenness in relative numbers. Community structure is influenced by many factors, including abiotic factors, species interactions, level of disturbance, and chance events. Some species, such as foundation species and keystone species, play particularly important roles in determining their community's structure. Two important measures ecologists use to describe the composition of a community are species richness and species diversity. Species richness is the number of different species in a particular community. If we found 30 species in one community and 300 species in another, the second community would have a much higher species richness than the first. Now, species diversity is a measure of community complexity. It is a function of both the number of different species in the community, the species richness, and the relative abundance, that is, their species evenness. Larger numbers of species and more even abundance of a species lead to higher species diversity. A forest community with 20 different kinds of trees in even abundances would have greater species diversity than a forest community with the same number of species and very uneven abundances. Several members of the same species in a particular area at the same time constitute a population, and the area is called the habitat of that species. Different species may live together in a habitat, forming a community. The different species in a community might interact through a food web or exist in symbiosis. Symbiosis is a state in which members of different species live in physical contact, mutually benefiting from each other's presence. Lichens that occur on exposed rocks throughout the world are a wonderful example of symbiosis. They are usually a fungus and an algae, or bacterium, living symbiotically. The photosynthetic algae provide nutrients for the fungus. The fungus seems to provide support and the ability to extract essential minerals from inorganic rock. Because of this pairing, lichens can colonize extreme environments where the fungi or algae cannot exist alone. These include the rocks of Antarctica and of Donegal, Ireland, while lichens scraped off from the rocks in Donegal is used to color the woolen materials called Donegal tweed. Species composition refers to the contribution of each plant species to the vegetation. Botanical composition is another term used to describe species composition, which is generally expressed as a percent, so that all species components add up to 100%. Species composition is how many different species make up a community. That is, to express in relative numbers, species richness. Species composition is the identification of all the different living things within a given area. Notice on this screen that we can count only species, not the number of representatives of each genome. Species composition can be expressed on either an individual species basis or by species groups that are defined according to the objectives of the inventory or monitoring program. Relative species abundance is a component of biodiversity and refers to how common or rare a species is relative to other species in a different location or community. Relative abundance is the percent composition of an organism of a particular kind relative to the total number of organisms in the area. Species richness is simply a count of species, and it does not take into account the abundance of the species or their relative abundance distributions. Species diversity takes into account both species richness and species evenness. Absolute abundance is defined by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the NOAA Fisheries Glossary as the total number of a kind of fish in a population. This is rarely known, and usually estimates are made from the relative abundance. What is the difference between species richness and biodiversity? Well, distribution is a part of the species richness and reflects genetic diversity. This is the number of different homogeneous genes available within the species or the population. Ecological dominance is the degree to which a taxon is more numerous than its competitors in an ecological community, or makes up more of the biomass. Humans define most ecological communities by their dominant species. In many cases of wet woodlands in western Washington, the dominant tree is western hemlock, Tsuga heterophylla. Most ecological communities are defined by their dominant species, as expressed by both count-based dominance and overall ground cover abundance. In temperate bogs, the dominant vegetation is usually a species of sphagnum peat moss, Sphagnum flexuosum. Tidal swamps in the tropics are usually dominated by species of mangrove of the family Rhizophoraceae. Exposed rocky Washington state shorelines are dominated by sessile organisms such as barnacles, mussels, lippets, and sea stars. sometimes even visited by little Lego man. Hey, how did that get in there? Individuals of a population can be distributed in one of three basic patterns. They can be equally spaced apart, uniform dispersion, dispersed randomly with no particular pattern, random dispersion, or clustered in groups, clumped dispersion. Three basic types of population distribution within the regional range are uniform, random, and clumped. A specific type of organism can establish one of three possible patterns of dispersion in each area: random pattern, an aggregated pattern, in which organisms gather in clumps, or in a uniform pattern, with a roughly equal spacing of individuals. Random distribution is rare in nature as biotic factors, such as the interactions with neighboring individuals, and abiotic factors, such as climate or soil conditions, generally cause organisms to be either clustered or spread apart. Uniform dispersion is observed in plant species that inhibit the growth of nearby individuals. For example, the sage plant, Slavia leucophylla, secretes toxins, a phenomenon called negative allopathy. The chemicals kill off surrounding plants in a circle around the individual sage plants, leading to a uniform distance between each plant. Animals that maintain defined territories, such as nesting penguins, also exhibit uniform dispersion. Random dispersion occurs with dandelions and other plants that have wind-dispersed seeds that germinate wherever they happen to fall in favorable environments. Clumped dispersion is seen in plants that drop their seeds straight to the ground, such as the pine trees, or animals that live in groups like elk and deer. Clumped dispersions may also result from habitat heterogeneity. If favorable conditions are localized, organisms will tend to clump around those, such as lions around a watering hole. In this way, the dispersion pattern of individuals within a population provides more information about how they interact with each other and with their environment than does a simple density measurement. Just as lower density species might have more difficulty finding a mate, solitary species with random dispersion might have a similar difficulty when compared to species clumped together in groups. Key causes of dispersal include competition encouraging dispersal, that is, habitat depletion. This is often a key cause of dispersal in plants, as resources such as light, root space, and nutrients are depleted by the parental plant. Competition dispersal is called habitat depletion. Infanticide is a common response to habitat depletion in rodents and can be thought of as the result of resource competition. Dispersal is a topic in both behavior and ecology. Many of the ecological principles concerning dispersal apply to both plants and animals. As ecologists, we are often concerned with the numbers of individuals that disperse and how movement into and out of populations affects the growth of these populations. Animal behaviorists look at dispersal on a different scale, asking different questions. What causes an animal to decide to disperse? Is dispersal behavior linked to age, sex, or behavioral history? Ask yourself, within a population, are there behavioral syndromes that make some animals more likely to disperse than others? Unlike migration, dispersal is usually a one-way trip to an unknown destination. Perhaps the greatest difficulty for a dispersing animal is finding unoccupied, suitable habitat. In most species, all the best locations will already be occupied, and the disperser is faced with an uncertain future, including the possibility of starvation in an unsuitable habitat. For most animal species, dispersal is the simple act of finding suitable habitat. These are the topics of metapopulations and speciation. Yeah, you got it. Consider this. Who disperses? Are they the parents or the offspring? Dispersers in birds and mammals are likely to be adolescents or young adults, lacking the experience or strength to wrest the favored location from their parents. They leave, or are driven away from the parental territories. Female dispersers are unlikely to remain without a suitable habitat for long, as males with territories, or harems, will typically accept multiple females into their area. A striking counterexample is to view that younger animals always suffer the risks associated with dispersal as a honeybee, in which the reigning queen in a colony leaves with a swarm. This allows one of her daughters to inherit the nest, food, and the portion of the worker force that the queen leaves behind. Breeding helps to fill the openings. Several factors affect small-scale species richness, including geographic factors such as the regional species pool, dispersal, distance and ease of dispersal, biological factors such as competition, facilitation, and predation, as well as environmental factors such as resource availability and environmental heterogeneity. Try to understand species variability. Existing traits may be restrictive and not obvious until environmental conditions change. Then these may become more advantageous while previous traits, which are now less beneficial, become recessive. For example, dark-colored individuals may tend to die off and the light-colored survive more frequently. This is what Darwin called natural variation of the species. New traits may be acquired by several mechanisms of mutation, the natural rate of DNA transcription errors, which is controlled by the genes for repairing DNA and is fostered and mitigated by sexual union from random DNA changes caused by natural radiation and mutagenic chemicals. The insertion of foreign DNA into the genetic code by pathogens, and sometimes by the incorporation of elements from other organisms, as happened with the acquisition of the nucleus and the mitochondria of cells. The diversity of species in a particular area depend not only on the number of species found, but also on their numbers. Ecologists call the number of species in an area its richness, and the relative abundance of a species is its evenness. They are both measures of diversity. Kamiak Butte with 1 moose and 1 elk, when compared with another area with 2 moose and 10 elk, therefore have the same species richness, but different species evenness. Diversity depends not only on richness, but also on evenness. Species evenness refers to how close in numbers each species is in an environment. Mathematically, it is defined as a diversity index, a measure of biodiversity, which quantifies how equal the community is numerically. So, if there are 400 deer and 10 elk, the community is not very even. Richness is a measure of the number of different kinds of organisms present in a particular area. For example, species richness is the number of different species present. Count this as the number of deer, elk, moose, coyotes, porcupines, cougar, and the list continues. That is how we express diversity. Species distribution is the way in which a biologic taxon is spatially arranged. The geographic limits of a particular taxon's distribution are expressed as range, often represented as shaded areas on a map. Clumped dispersion is often due to uneven distribution of nutrients or other resources in the environment. It can be caused by social interactions between individuals. Additionally, in organisms that do not move, such as plants, offspring may be very close to their parents and be seen as clumped dispersion patterns. Landscape genetics is an emerging discipline that combines the fields of population genetics and landscape ecology. Gene flow is the incorporation of genes into the gene pool of one population from another population. Here, we again tap into the concept of metapopulations. As you refer to a subject population, describe its richness, evenness, distribution characteristics, function, and integrity. Lead this into resilience and stability. Always try to pivot on unique, niche-filling traits. Understanding happens here. An increase in species richness occurs from the poles to the tropics, referred to as latitudinal gradient in species diversity. Well, why the increase? Most plausible hypotheses include 1. Tropics have been more environmentally stable for longer periods of time, allowing more species to develop and adapt. 2. Tropics have been colonized for a longer period, thus more opportunity for speciation. 3. Higher temperatures and moisture tropical climates promote more rapid speciation rates. The explanation is explained by many factors, none of them revealing as a singular cause. Taxonomically related species in biological classification systems investigates taxonomic rank and the relative level of a group of organisms, a taxon, in a taxonomic hierarchy. Examples of taxonomic ranks are species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain. You've heard those before. Guilds are the group of species that exploit the same resources, or that exploit different resources in related ways. Not that the species within a guild occupy the same or even similar ecological niches, they are just from the same guild. Functional groups are those filling similar niches. They are certain birds feeding on insects born from the beaver pond, ungulate herbivores all feeding on the Saskatoon serviceberry, Amelincher anifolia, leaves along the south aspect of Kamiak Butte. For our purposes, we defined landscape resilience as the ability of a landscape to sustain desired ecological functions, robust native biodiversity, and critical landscape processes over time, under changing conditions and despite multiple stressors and uncertainties. We use two main factors when measuring diversity, that is, richness and evenness. Richness is a measure of the number of different kinds of organisms presented in a particular area. Species richness is the number of different species present in the habitat area. Here, species diversity and richness are minimal. One species, all of the same age and height, that is 50-year-old lodgepole pine trees, Pinus contorta. Similarity indices measure similarity between communities based on species composition. This is useful when comparing communities under different management. It can also be used to compare composition changes over time. Determine how similar the communities are to what is now and what was 10 years ago. Now we see species diversity is high, 6 species, and richness shows occupation in many layers of the forest stand. There are benefits of diverse range plant communities, such as a mixture of plants provides a forage for a variety of insects and vertebrate species populations. That's biodiversity. A mixture of plants will cause some plants that can survive drought, insect plagues, and or disease outbreaks so that the site will have some level of species protection in those years. A mixture of plants contains a variety of genetic material that can be useful in long-term survival. We call that one sustainability. Soils improve with nitrogen fixers, that is deep-rooted plants to bring nutrients from the soil layers below up to the plant roots. Some species work together so that both can survive. This is commensalism. Think about the mycorrhizal symbiosis with plants. Healthy, diverse plant communities generally have all niches filled and are theoretically less likely to be invaded by noxious or opportunistic introduced species. Talk about this one with the North Africa grass, Ventinata dubia, at Kamiak Butte. A landscape-scale outbreak infestation of the mountain pine beetle, Dendroctonus ponderosea, involved ponderosa pine, Pinus ponderosa. But because the mountain pine beetle is about to run out of food, non-host trees may become the target of the mountain pine beetle. The outbreak will collapse within 2 to 3 year period as food resources are depleted. The intermediate disturbance hypothesis states that intermediate levels of disturbance, stress, or predation promote species diversity by reducing competitive exclusion. Species diversity is low at the low levels of disturbance due to competitive exclusion and at high levels of disturbance due to high mortality. This changes through population maturity stages. Biodiversity can be difficult to define because the definition consists of two distinct components. Species richness, that is, variety of species or the number of different species, and species abundance, relative abundance of species. Numerical species richness is the number of species per specified number of individuals. Species density, the number of species per unit area. Simple and easy to calculate and therefore intuitively appealing. However, because it does not account for the relative abundance, it is often not sensitive to environmental disturbance. Conservation biologists have designed a variety of objective means to measure biodiversity empirically. Each measure of biodiversity relates to a particular use of the data. For practical conservationists, measurements should include a quantification of values that are commonly shared among locally affected organisms, including humans. For others, a more economically defensible definition should allow the ensuring of continued possibilities for both adaptation and future use by humans, assuring environmental sustainability.